Sounds good.
Dirty Moderates, always a pleasure to welcome back friends of the show, people who've actually kind of been on our show, I think, at least once every year. And our guest today is the great Ross Kaminsky. If you don't know Ross or haven't heard him on here, he's a talk show host of KOA Colorado. And I say really one of the more honorable libertarians, to use the word, if I could categorize him out there, because he's not a Republican. He's certainly not a Democrat, and he's no bullshit. And because he's no bullshit, we're also sort of trying to be dirty moderates after dark here. By that, we mean that we both are imbibing this. I've never done this before on any show, but we're avowing that we're doing it so that if we are sloppy and slurry, the audience knows. He's got Yellowstone, and I've got this is a Basil Hayden whiskey I love, artfully aged, but it doesn't tell me how many years. I don't know. I just know that it's artfully aged. So, Ross, welcome to the program.
As long as it's artfully, we're good. Let's see. Mine's 101 proof, and I'm not sure how many years, but it's pretty tasty stuff.
Tasty stuff. Yeah. So Ross and I had talked to each other about doing this a long time ago. So at least we're going to do it now. And there is plenty to talk about. So Ross, I mean, let's dive in first with something that I thought was very relevant. And I'm writing a Substack piece about it, relational. Here we go. You tweeted something the other day that was great. This was actually on Sunday, I believe. Here's what you tweeted. Nothing is more unpredictable than war. The Civil War had 750,000 Americans dead by the end. Started with the Battle of Fort Sumter, which the actual fighting caused, wait for it, 0 casualties. I didn't know that, by the way. Yes, Iran must pay a serious price for this, and perhaps within just hours, but Republicans yelling at Biden to hurry up and attack need to shut the hell up. That is a Ross Kaminsky tweet. I love it. Yep. Let's do it. Tell me.
It's a damn good tweet.
It is. That's why I read it. I saved it. No, I not just because you're coming. You've been on already. I don't need to do the ladies and gentlemen. Let me read my notes. But right. Tell it. Let's start with that, because the world is at this perilous point. There's been 167 attacks as of yesterday by Iranian-backed proxies against American forces, culminating in this horrific death of these three heroes, the 46-year-old guy and the 2 other young 20-something people. What the fuck? I mean, take it away. I mean,
Iran needs to pay a price, and America, whenever it imposes that price, and I would note that a couple hours ago, it was reported that Joe Biden has said he's reached a decision on what to do. We don't know what that is, but whatever that price is, it's got to be coming from the United States of America. It can't be coming from Joe Biden after having been pushed by Republicans or anything like that. Joe Biden is a hardcore old school politician, right? He's a stubborn dude. He doesn't know anything other than politics. He's basically never had a real job. And he's very, very, very partisan. And he's the kind of guy where if he feels like he's getting pressure from the other party, it will actually diminish his likelihood of doing something. And he's not unique in that. It would have been true of Trump, and it would have been true of all of them. And this has to be about what's best for the United States of America. And I got to say, for years, I have just been really frustrated with the Lindsey Graham and formerly Lindsey Graham and John McCain wing of the party that never saw a war they didn't want to get involved in. And maybe it's because both my parents were in the military. I did not serve in the military. But when you've got someone in the military in your family, you don't want a war, right? That's when people get hurt and dead. And I'm just sick of these people saying strike Tehran, strike inside Iran. And I am not a squish. Iran needs to pay a price, a big price. Take out one of their ships, take out some of their small boats, take out some of their Revolutionary Guard Corps mid-level officers or high-level officers. But these people saying strike Iran, what the hell is wrong with you?
Right. And the reason I wanted to start with this was because I think it does place this unusual, again, you're absolutely right. I think Trump is partisan. Trump is a Trumpist, but there would be plenty of Republicans who would be, I think, equally as partisan in how they would respond to, let's say, a Democratic Congress if it were in reverse. Mm-hmm. But the whole essence of, and you are, to be clear to the audience, you are not MAGA. I'm certainly not MAGA. You're not a Trumper or whatever. But one of the things I think that has helped Trump gain support, and I think has had a lot of resonance, is he kept us out of war, whether we like it or not, whether it was him or not. We didn't have any real wars. And the idea that we are now at a place where there are people on the right beyond Lindsey Graham that I'm reading on Twitter, and I don't know everybody's MAGA cred enough because some of these people I don't follow closely enough, but they're sort of saying Biden has to be tougher, and it's all because of his weakness, and we got to do something about it. And these are people that I've kind of have this weird, like, kind of neo-isolationist view of things now. So, I mean, what's going on the right where all of a sudden now you have people, not just the neocons, the Lindsey Grahams and those people, the John McCain, legacy, people out there calling for what exactly? I mean, because I'm with you. Iran, as I tweeted today, as a serpentine menace, and what is the plan that they have here? 167 attacks on our forces. I'm sorry, since October 7th, I should add. That is unacceptable. But what do you do?
Well, all the people who say that Joe Biden is too weak are exactly right. I mean, I had Kim Strassel on my show a couple of days ago, and her last book was essentially a book comparing Joe Biden to Jimmy Carter. And so far, Biden is continuing with that based on his really weak response to all of these indirect Iranian provocations. And they're indirect, but they're still Iranian provocations. And, when a bully keeps coming to, take your lunch money or spit in your face, and you don't punch him back, he's just going to keep doing it until someone makes him stop. And it's time to make them stop. And again, you're right. I'm not MAGA. I think back to the Trump times and pre-Trump times, and this is a small sample size, but Vladimir Putin invaded Crimea before Trump and after Trump, not during Trump. And, during Trump, okay, how about another one? Barack Obama issued a red line. You remember the whole Barack Obama
Syria
red line thing?
Yep.
And he didn't enforce it. And then Donald Trump came in and told the president of Syria, Bashar Assad, if you use chemical weapons against your own people, that's a red line for me. And Assad did it. And Trump launched a whole bunch of Tomahawk weapons very early in his presidency, and upheld that red line. And then Trump sent that ninja missile, which I think is really what it's called, to take out Soleimani and
Iranian general. Yeah.
And I think I think peace through strength is a real thing. And I think you get war through weakness. So my point with Biden and going back after Iran is not that he shouldn't. It's that the Republicans jumping up and down about it are not helping.
That's right. Yeah. And I said, like in my tweet as well, I said, we don't want war, but we don't want appeasement. It is the kind of Ronald Reagan peace through strength thing, which people snicker at. Notably Barack Obama, which is, you actually opened up my next question, my next discussion point. So let's start with the 2012 debate. You probably remember. Now, I voted for Obama twice. I rather like Mitt Romney more and more. I actually liked him then. I didn't dislike him. But he famously, in a foreign policy debate, brought up how Russia and the rise of Russia would be a real problem. By the way, Dick Nixon said this in 1994, another foreign policy genius that was dismissed by a lot of people in his later years for being prescient on a lot. He said, Yeltsin is a drunk, and it's going to be this authoritarian rise and all that stuff. Mitt Romney in the debate, if you remember, says Russia's a threat, and Barack Obama very condescendingly says, Mitt, the 1980s wants its Cold War thinking back, or whatever he said, very, very rudely.
Yeah.
And everyone the press was just, awash in stories and just all aflutter about how could Mitt Romney be talking about Russia. Meanwhile, that's 2012. You're right. 2014 was Crimea. Okay, the first country, independent nation annexed since World War II. Putin took that. The Red Line Syria was around that time too. And then all of this in the second Obama term, which I have now evaluated as one of the worst second terms of any president, in my opinion, certainly on the foreign policy level, because then you have, which I was against firmly then, what I think was a dastardly deal with Iran that did nothing but appease a bunch of theocratic mullahs, who are bad faith actors. And to your point, and I am so not a Trumper, but I mean, there is something to be said for, and my cab driver home last night from LAX said this to me. He said, look, I don't like Trump, man, but he's a crazy motherfucker and people don't want that crazy. They don't trust him. So they're going to do shit. Now, I thought there was kind of like a common man wisdom in that.
I think so too. And I think it's commonly said about the Middle East, but just because it's commonly said doesn't mean it's wrong, that the only thing that's really understood and respected there is strength and being willing to use it. And, deterrence is a combination of capability and will, and you got to have both. And under Biden, we've only had one, and that may be changing now. But it's important for folks to recognize it is the only thing they understand is strength and the willingness to use it. And I will say Biden has plenty of his own troubles already. He's got the lowest or second lowest approval ratings of any poll since they started this kind of polling back around the Eisenhower years, and the border is a disaster for him. But this is teetering, going back to the tweet that you shared of mine, this is teetering on the kind of stuff that defines presidencies forever, the way the George W. Bush presidency is defined by Afghanistan and Iraq, the way FDR is defined by World War II, mostly. And depending on how this goes, which is the point of my tweet, is that it is entirely unpredictable. This could help Joe Biden politically, or I think a little bit more probable, and I say that more out of not out of attacking Biden, but out of just the inherent unpredictability, this could end up destroying his whatever is left of his legacy.
One of the things that I think certainly has been reported, but gotten, I don't think enough ink, is Anthony Blinken saying that the world's at its most dangerous place since 1973. I mean, Anthony Blinken just said that. And then on top of that, do you know a number of foreign generals now? I'm talking about Britain. I'm talking about a lot of Western Europe, certainly England. I want to say even Lithuania, for whatever that's worth. They have said that they believe, and this is heartbreaking to me because of what Putin has done now in Ukraine, that the Ukrainian effort has failed. That basically it's just going to die out. It's not going to. They're not going to get their end. They're not going to achieve their desired ends, and basically Putin's going to grab that territory. That would be, after all of this blood and treasure. I mean, not our blood, but certainly all our treasure.
Yeah.
Isn't that a real? I mean, you have to throw in Ukraine, and we're going to talk about Israel, Hamas, and the anti-Semitism rampant on the left and all that stuff. But what do you think about this? What's your take on the Ukraine situation? Now, have you been on the train? Have you been on board with giving Zelensky money?
Yeah, well, so let's be careful what we're talking about here. We're not really giving Ukraine money, not much. Right. We're giving them, we're buying weapons for them.
Right.
We're mostly not handing them money. Sometimes we're handing them money to be used for the purchase of weapons. I would note there was a very interesting story the other day about the Ukrainian government uncovering something like $40 million of corruption in a contract to buy, I think, mortars and some kind of other things where some of the money got diverted. And I thought that was, and all the usual suspects would say, see, it's corrupt and we shouldn't support them. But that's not the right way to look at it. The right way to look at it is they found it and they publicly announced it, and they're doing what they can to stop this stuff because this is life and death to them. But so here's the thing that I think kind of the isolationist wing of the Republican Party, probably including Donald Trump. And when I say probably, what I mean is it's still a little bit unclear to me where he is on Ukraine. He has not staked out a strong position as to whether he would help or not. He's doing that with a lot of things. He hasn't staked out a strong position on the federal government's role in abortion, actually. He's trying to play not exactly down the middle, but just play his cards close to his vest. It is massively in the strategic interest of the United States and of Europe for Putin to lose. Correct. Which doesn't mean we have to love Ukraine. Okay. Mm-hmm. But if Putin wins, what's next? And how much bigger is the war going to be? And this all gets into very, very complicated game theory in terms of negotiation with the Europeans and how you lean on them to spend more. I think most Americans think that all the spending has been from the U.S. and none has been from the Europeans. That's right. Wrong. It's been about equal.
Yeah.
But the people who say, the Republicans who say that we shouldn't be helping Ukraine anymore are out of their freaking minds.
Crazy.
And can you imagine what Ronald Reagan, the man who killed the USSR, would say to see the Republican Party be the ones who are de facto welcoming the reestablishment of either the USSR or maybe the Russian Empire, which is probably more how Vladimir Putin thinks of it. It's disgusting.
Yeah. I mean, look, I'm 49 now, and I was a kid in the Reagan era, but certainly was born into the Cold War time. I consider myself a proud Cold Warrior, a staunch anti-communist. Of course, it's not exactly what we're dealing with here, but I agree with you. I mean, how is and this has mystified me, by the way, with what I would call probably even the far right in the last 8 years, is hatred of certainly law enforcement and government institutions that have prosecuted people they don't like, but certainly this cozy, and I don't think everybody's a secret agent of the Kremlin, but I do think that there has been a tremendous accommodation for Putin's aims, for really, for all sorts of corrupt and short-sighted reasons. And I find that to be, I mean, I completely had been a big supporter of Ukraine. I brought the point because I'm worried that if the Biden administration, not because we shouldn't be doing, I think they've done the right thing all the way, and we've sent enough. We can continue to help. I'm worried that this intersection of the Hamas Israel thing, potentially Iran, who knows about China and Taiwan? I wasn't even thinking that at the moment, and then Ukraine and Russia is a real devil's triangle here. And I'm just worried, about, we have limited resources. Certainly many top military experts reported to Politico, I believe it was yesterday, it might have been this morning, I don't know, I'm a little jet lagged, that we took our eyes off the ball in the Middle East once we withdrew from, once we drew down in Iraq and even Afghanistan, and, we have limited resources, and that we'd have to spend $1 billion roughly, the Pentagon would, to rebuild our infrastructure for what we had in the Middle East, not to go to war, just to have ourselves on the ready. I mean, should we be spending more money, in your opinion, on the military?
Yes, but it should be. It's probably not as much more as some of the big spending, like people on the Defense Appropriations Subcommittee would like to see, because I'm sure there is a ton of stuff being spent, including keeping certain bases open that we don't need, that is just pure waste and maintaining unnecessary jobs in powerful congressional members of Congress home districts. So we probably do need to spend a little more. We probably don't need to spend a lot more. We just need to spend it smarter. We absolutely positively need to increase the number of chips on our Navy. This has been known for 30 years, and it keeps going down and down and down. And it's very difficult to, this kind of situation we're in now, we need another carrier group over there. And we had to send the USS Gerald Ford back home because it was late on maintenance. And it makes us look weak. So I'm not one of these guys who says go spend an unlimited amount of money at the Pentagon. Maybe we need to spend a little more, but we also need to shift spending to this stuff. And I want to come back to one other thing you said before. I don't think that most of the Republicans who are arguing against helping Ukraine secretly want to help Russia. There's a few stupid people like that. I don't think that's mostly what's going on. I think that their mindset has become very, very narrowly isolationist. Mm-hmm. And unless something directly involves the United States of America, they think we shouldn't be involved. And they stop the analysis there. And they don't think about the next step. They don't really think about who it's helping versus hurting, or who are good guys and bad guys. And I think this is part of the reason that that at least some of the people who don't want to help Ukraine will be very, very aggressive to get the military going after what just happened in Jordan, because 3 Americans died. So now there you've got dead Americans. It obviously ties in America, and those people are going to want to do something, even though actually the situation in Ukraine is more important for America's strategic interest than what's going on in and around Jordan.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. Well, it's like I said, that's why I inserted. I mean, I think if you were to listen to the sort of left-leaning media, and I mean the far left media, which I don't, every single thing is a Russian plan, and Russians is, to Russia with love with them. And if you listen to MSNBC, every Republican is a Putin asset, which is preposterous. I mean, that just is not the case. There's no evidence of that. I think it's stupid. But I do find it interesting, though, Ross, and I know you're not a Biden fan, that for the most part, he has sort of, the parties have kind of shifted roles on this. And Biden has largely been, maybe you could say, as sort of Reagan/George H.W. Bush kind of leader on global affairs. He has remained mainly pro-Israel. I mean, there's things they haven't done, but we could have a lot worse. Certainly been strong on Ukraine. Yes, his age and his the way he comports himself and all that may project a certain weakness, but overall, I mean, now we'll see what this year holds, but overall, I don't think he's been bad. Do you?
No, I think it's been his best stuff. It's both of those things that you named. And by the way, before I continue, I haven't seen you drinking nearly enough.
Well, I'm doing it. I'm doing it. What? I'm not going to chug. Are you chugging it?
No, I'm drinking very slowly, but I haven't even noticed.
I bet. No, I'm doing it. I'm doing it. You know what? This is so smooth. This is so smooth, Ross. So the audience to know that I don't. It depends on the whiskey or rye. I don't drink everything neat. I could do it. This is so smooth. I could really start guzzling here. So all right, let's do it. I love it.
Right,
I appreciate it. I like the audience.
Yeah. So
it's a good clip.
Biden's been very good on this. I'm sure not so much on Ukraine, but on the Israel stuff, and maybe this will transition into something else you want to talk about. But on the Israel stuff, he's been getting a lot of pressure from his left not to support Israel, which is another. It's actually more shameful how many Democrats have come out de facto in support of Hamas, even though they wouldn't word it that way. It's more shameful that than how many Republicans are saying they don't want to help Ukraine.
Oh, yeah. I mean, so the focus here at this show, because I am a dyed-in-the-wool Zionist, even if I weren't Jewish, I would be. It is horrifying to watch since October 7th, what has gone on with an outpouring of anti-Semitism. But as I've written about on my Substack and said, anti-Semitism on the left is only finally manifesting itself because basically, the sort of anti-Zionist, anti-Semitic Marxist left is finally getting heard. It's been a lot of years in the making through academia. I tell people that, the Soviet Union created the PLO. Let's not forget that. And it wasn't like Arafat was this angel. He is a fraud. He's an Egyptian. Right. He stole billions of taxpayer dollars. They've never wanted peace. And here we are. Now we can get into Israeli intelligence failures and all that other stuff and whether we like Bibi or not. But when people say, my God, the carnage there, it's like, man, maybe you shouldn't have raped Israeli women and children, or raped Israeli women and murdered Israeli children. You should have thought about that. And you can argue to the extent of what America does over in terms of Israel, but the depth of anti-Semitism, right, which I equate with anti-Zionism anyway. I think anti-Zionism is kind of a bullshit thing. I think that it has been, you could see the youth saying they won't vote for Biden, Arabs in Michigan won't vote, or saying they won't vote for Biden, and that he is actually, to his credit, not pressured Bibi all that much. I mean, he's kind of held the line. He is kind of the old school, maybe not quite Scoop Jackson Democrat, but he is of that era where the Democrats were very pro-Israel. 92, I believe, by the way, Democrats refused to censor that scumbag Rashida Tlaib. Who like Ilhan Omar are just Jew haters to their core. I can't even believe we're talking about this, and also liars and phonies too. But you're right; it's astonishing. And you think of the post-Biden Democratic Party, and it gives me more than heart palpitations.
So a few things here. First, just for a little bit of history, going even further back. Many folks probably know this, but a guy who was called the Grand Mufti of Palestine, so kind of the head religious figure in that Palestinian area before what's now Israel, was personal friends with Hitler and completely supported what Hitler was doing back at that time, less than a decade or around a decade before the founding of Israel. What else? So I went to an Ivy League university. My dad went to the same school. My dad, not rich, but likes to give a little money to the school from time to time. It makes him feel good. And I've been telling my dad for 20 years, and I'll just name it's Columbia University. I've been telling my dad for 20 years that Columbia University is a cesspool of anti-Semitism and anti-Americanism, but anti-Semitism, even though it probably has the biggest Jewish population as a percentage of the student body of any of the Ivies, I bet. And none of this surprises me at all. I've been saying for years on my radio show that the real home of anti-Semitism in America is on the left. I do not mean that there are not right-wing anti-Semites. There are plenty of them, and they are bad people, and I'm fine if they all get hit by a bus. But those people, and this is a really important point I want to make here for the liberals who like to call Trump Hitler and stuff like that. And that is the real anti-Semites on the right. And you think about people like David Duke or maybe some Proud Boys or douchebags like that. Right. They are not part of any actual conservative or Republican coalition. Most Republicans don't have anything to do with those people, don't want to have anything to do with those people, and consider them beyond the pale. But the anti-Semites on the left, they have tenure, and they go to all the best cocktail parties, and they are completely accepted. As you just said, they're in Congress.
Oh, yeah.
And there is a big difference here. And if there's been any positive to come from one of the most horrific things that's ever happened during my lifetime, this massacre in Israel on October 7th, it is the unmasking of the American left, and especially the academic left, as to their true, deep anti-Semitism. And, you know, you and I are very much on the same page with this.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's funny. I mean, I went to NYU undergrad, but I went to Brown for grad school, and NYU's been horrible. I expected Brown to be worse, actually, than of all of them, but it's interesting to see Penn and Columbia and Cornell, and Harvard, lest we forget Harvard, be as horrific as they have been. I am very, 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 I'm not happy. That's not the word. But like you, I am, I feel like, yes, the mask has come off. So I don't have to scream about this, because I always felt like I was writing these articles about, there's all this trouble in academia and all this trouble on the left, and it's real. But to your point, I literally was having a conversation with my friends in New York, where I just got back from, who cannot even fathom this, because they are pro-Israel Democrats. And I keep trying to say to them, and I'm going to paraphrase what you said, there is little to no institutional anti-Semitism in the conservative movement or on the right. Neo-Nazis, David Duke, these douchebags, to use your word, the guys that go out on the freeway or wherever that is in Florida with Nazi flags, they're a bunch of losers. They're a bunch of wayward losers. They're awful people, but those people that just marched in whatever city that was, okay. But Ivy League educated kids are chanting from the river to the sea, marching on campus with death to Jews signs. So you tell me, by the way, entertainment industry, right? You think Jews run it. If Jews run it, where are all the Jews coming out in support of Israel besides Deborah Messing and Michael Rappaport? Everyone's afraid to say anything. In the Golden Globes, they can't even say one goddamn thing about hostages. Not one thing. I mean, some of them were wearing yellow ribbons, but no one could stand up there. I actually don't want celebrities giving their opinions, but if we're going to do that, no one did a Hamas speech or a Palestinian speech like Vanessa Redgrave, Zionist hoodlums in the 70s. That was a famous when she won for Julia. But I just can't believe the like you say, it's cocktail parties, it's among universities, it's among the elite, where you could be sitting there having canapes and Chardonnay with a scholarly Jew hater.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, think about, these college educated kids, and it's worse. There's a strong correlation between how aggressively anti-Semitic they are and the perceived quality of the school, right? So the best schools have the biggest problems. And it's not coming from nowhere. It's not coming from like the air in Cambridge, Massachusetts. It's coming from their professors. You remember that dude? I don't remember which school he was at. One of those schools who went out and was talking in public on a microphone about how the attack was exhilarating. And he got
Cornell. Yeah, I wrote about him I'm going to send you, by the way, sorry to interrupt you. So when I did Substack, I got to send you, we'll move on after this, not to 20 minutes. It's called Liberals, Leftists, and the Jews is the name of the essay. A takedown of DEI and intersectionality, but that's another story. But anyway,
so I want to suggest something to you and to everybody watching us right now, if you haven't seen it already.
Yeah.
So there's a very, very successful musician. His name is John Ondrasik, but most people know him by his stage name, which is 5 for Fighting. And so John Ondrasik, Ondrasik. And John recently put out a video called OK. And it is a video essentially castigating Americans, especially college students, who came out almost immediately after the attacks and protested in favor of quote unquote Palestine, which isn't even really a thing.
No.
And there, by the way, there are no Palestinian refugees anymore.
I know.
And we can get into all that. But anyway, go watch.
And it's a Roman term to erase Jewish identity. It doesn't even exist. It's not real.
It's not real.
Right.
And anyway, go find John Ondrasik's video called OK. It's easy to find on Twitter. Watch it, share it. And I thought of it because you were talking about Hollywood people. He doesn't live in Hollywood, but he lives in California. And this dude is just standing up for honor and truth and moral clarity. And I literally had a tear in my eye at the end of the video, and that is a music video. That has never happened before.
Wow. And I'm not familiar with him, so thank you for that, guys. Listen up. We will link in the show notes when we drop the episode, folks, so you can hear it. I'm eager to hear it. Thank you for that. Ross, before we move on to Trump and the 14th Amendment in Colorado and the election. So in the essay that I wrote, which many of these people watching and listening to this will have read, and if you haven't read, it's done very well in Substack, is I also pointed out that if you were going to institutionalize racism in the name of justice, right, eventually someone's going to be left out. In this case, it's Jews who in that intersectional, crazy DEI worldview are white. Well, that's news to some people. If you're a Mizrahi Jew in Iraq, they didn't know they were white. But regardless, the world being divided, as you know, so foolishly into the oppressive category, oppressor and oppressed category based on the color of your skin. You saw it culminate in the obscene testimonies of those university presidents. To Christopher Rufo's credit, many conservative activists, they've been working hard to try to get us back to a liberal principle, not a leftist principle of colorblind equality, in a place where, we've got to stop obsessing over this because, again, I've always said identity politics devours itself. What do you say?
I couldn't agree with you more. I also think that you think about Martin Luther King Jr. and his very, very famous dream of judging people by the content of their characters rather than the color of their skin, which is a fundamentally American idea. And it is absolutely shocking that essentially every Republican or conservative within that broad coalition that we've been talking about that does not include racists and neo-Nazis, every single mainstream and even close to mainstream Republican believes in Martin Luther King Jr.'s dream. So many people on the left now do not. And you look at some of these people, these terrible, evil people like Ibram X. Kendi and Robin DiAngelo, and on and on.
Well, they're grifters.
They are grifters. They are absolutely grifters. That is it. But I mean, Ibram Kendi is a professor at Boston University, and he says the remedy for past discrimination is current discrimination. So he's saying because there was anti-Black racism in the past, there should be anti-white racism now. That's evil. It's racism. It's anti-American. It's anti-Martin Luther King. And it plays right back into what you were saying before about the college kids coming out there and cheering all this stuff because they are getting it from evil grifters. Yeah, no, it's true. Ibram Kendi also, you probably know this because you're really on top of it, but listeners may not know. He has a proposal. I mean, it's a DOA proposal, of course, that there should be an unelected federal bureaucracy which determines
However they do that, I don't know. Levels of systemic racism and discrimination in every aspect of American life from this issue of Pravda. I mean, I thought to myself, well, I'm sorry, what? What are you unelected? I mean, listen, he doesn't lie. He tells you where he stands. And that's why, again, always better to know. Guess what? The unmasking, look at the anti-Semitism on college campuses and institutionalized on the left. Now we know. I'm having a former DEI director who resigned, a black woman. You may know her, Tabby Ali. She's coming on the program because she literally resigned from her position at a small liberal arts college because a black woman, said DEI is anti-Semitic. And no, she's not Trump's henchman. She doesn't work for Mike Pence. Liberals will go right there. Well, she once voted for Ronald Reagan. So the point is it's anti-Semitic, and, isn't it amazing that we can accommodate every anti-ism in the world, but let's not go that far. Let's not call them anti-Semitic. I mean, they're fighting for self-determination. Isn't that an interesting psychoanalytic divide? What, I mean, before, again, we're going to move on, but what,
it's super interesting. And I think, if I can be positive for a moment, glad to see you drinking there. If I can be positive for a moment, I think that in the last several years, and I don't think this is a Trump phenomenon, I think this is something else, that people have become less afraid to criticize evil Black people or Hispanics or Muslims because they're evil, not because of any of that other stuff. They become less afraid to criticize them because in the past, in the not too distant past, nobody would criticize Ibram Kendi because he would always say, or his defenders would always say, if you criticize him, you must be a racist. And people are really afraid, and I understand why, of being called racists. I think that tide is turning, and thank goodness for that.
Yeah, somebody was asked on another show, I don't remember who it was now, but, do you think the cancel culture is coming to an end? And they said yes, and I don't know. I hope so.
I mean, either.
The online mob is strong, but again, but again, what it requires, is somebody, not you or me, because we come at it organically from what the fuck on this stuff and why we're doing this, but somebody who's been associated with this craziness to put their hand out and say, stop. And I don't know who that is, but it's not a moderate like me or a moderate or libertarian or conservative like you, whatever our labels are. Somebody who has been on the traditional kind of establishment left who can say enough.
No, I'll tell you who it is. I'll tell you who it is. It's the billionaire donors to the Ivy League schools.
Yeah.
Right. Yes, so we already saw Bill Ackman. There was news today about Ken Griffin.
I saw that.
Founder of Citadel, right? And the dude is worth $37 billion. And he said, no more money to Harvard until you fix all this. And this is happening at all these big schools. That's how you change it. Because most of this stuff is coming from academia. And then the other place is shareholders. There need to be shareholder revolts against this stuff. And one thing that is incredibly important, there are quite a lot of CEOs right now saying we are stopping DEI stuff. But what we got to really, really watch out for is whether they actually stop it or just rename it. And that's what we need to be careful about. But those are the groups: shareholders and billionaire donors to academia.
Right. No, I think that's right. Speaking of it, segueing on to what the politics of this country is in terms of its electoral landscape. Again, the nation does not want a rematch of Biden and Trump. I certainly don't either. As you know, like Joe Walsh, I'm a never Trumper. It doesn't mean every single thing the guy ever did was the worst thing in the world, but I don't think he's fit for office. And there's a lot of reasons I don't like him. However, I am genuinely concerned in a non-controversial way, though I guess I'm going to vote for him, for Joe Biden's cognitive. I don't think he's Alzheimer's, but I'm worried about his health. I'm worried about how he looks. I'm worried about the direction of the country. Before we get into just sort of trying to keep Trump off the ballot, what is your take of the overall picture? I know you're in Colorado. It's gone increasingly blue. I'm in California. But give me your overall snapshot of this race? And I mean, are we going to have Trump again? Is that what basically we're headed toward?
I think we're going to get Trump again, most likely. There's no reason to see anything different. It's unclear that within the Republican base, that even a conviction for a serious crime would throw them off of wanting to support him. That said, there are some states that run their primaries without party registration. And so independents, unaffiliateds can vote in Republican primaries in some states, like in New Hampshire. And so there is a very narrow path for Nikki Haley if something bad enough were to happen to Trump soon. But otherwise, look, this is, I think, well understood, but I'll say it anyway. Everybody realizes that most of the lawsuits against Donald Trump, with the clear exception of the classified documents lawsuit, in my opinion, which is a legit lawsuit, and maybe some of the stuff around Georgia, some of it. But this other stuff, starting with Alvin Bragg, was pure lawfare. And there's been a lot of thought that Democrats wanted to boost Donald Trump among Republicans because they want to run against him because they think he's the most beatable, which is probably right. But if you remember, and I know you do, back in 2016, it was a different group of Democrats for a different reason, but media Democrats boosted the hell out of Donald Trump. They gave him $1 billion worth of free airtime. Sure. The media made Donald Trump the nominee because they thought Hillary could beat him. And it didn't work out that way. And now a different group of Democrats may give Trump the nomination again and end up with the same result. Now, Trump is even weaker than he was in 2016 and probably even weaker than he was in 2020. But Joe Biden is also weaker than he was in 2020. And I have no idea how this is going to go. The polls show it very close. I think the polls are right. If the election were today, I think Trump would win. Yeah, and the reason that I think Trump would win is that the thing people care about most, as long as we are not involved in a big shooting war at the moment, is cost of living. And everybody sees the price of steak that they can't afford, the price of bread, dude, the price of a Big Mac. And everybody knows, and I'm not saying thanks, everybody knows it's right. Joe Biden's fault. And I think Trump will win because people want to vote for their own prosperity. They hate Trump, or at least they don't like Trump, but they cannot handle another 4 years of this. So I think Trump would win.
Right. So in terms of the Biden record, okay, I do think there have been some good investments like industrial policy, the CHIPS Act, and things like that. No. But hold on. Why not?
That's not the government's job.
To do what?
Kidding? That is not the government's job. Giving the richest corporations in the world billions of dollars of my children's future earnings. If you want to get them to set up businesses here, set up the tax code properly, right? Reduce regulations so that it's not so freaking expensive to set up a factory in Arizona. This stuff about $1 trillion for this and another $1 trillion for the stupid Green New Deal.
Well, I'm against. I was very against anti-inflation. That's ridiculous because it had nothing to do with that. But also, I also don't think that's how you make investments in climate either. But here's where I'm going with this.
Yeah,
a lot there. I think the problem that the communicators in the Democratic Party, not just the policy makers themselves, and I mean outside the Biden administration, have, is that too much money did overheat the economy. And they know that to be true and they won't admit it. And the second problem they have is, sure, you can give me all the facts and figures you want about inflation, but that doesn't mean the prices, just because the rate has come down, doesn't mean prices have come down. And their automatic response is, well, corporations are greedy.
Nobody believes that.
I know.
Right? If corporations were greedy, if that was the cause, we would have had inflation like this all the time. Right. Corporations didn't just suddenly get greedy. It's such a dumb answer that even economically ignorant Americans don't buy it.
Right.
Except for Elizabeth Warren.
I know. Right. My thing is that, I don't like deficits. I think the fact that we have $33 trillion in our national debt, and we're leaving that to your kids and everybody's future is just, I think neither party cares about the debt. But I will tell you the thing I've come around to, which is, and I've seen it, is that certainly, because I live in the People's Republic of California, which is such a disaster, the country needs to have lower taxes and less regulation. Period. Period. And there has never been a time, you can argue, yes, it increased the deficit, but there's never been a time that really hasn't jump-started prosperity. If there has, correct me, in the modern era, right? I mean, has there ever been, John F. Kennedy cut taxes? I mean, has there ever really been a time where, despite whatever deficits we've run, you can argue about Ronald Reagan and when 30 million jobs were created? So, I mean, it's a very fascinating thing. And I think the problem is that the Democratic Party, where the Republican Party now, to me, the party of Trump, the Democratic Party is not doing the party of ideas thing. They're just kind of reprising entitlement liberalism and old stuff. And let's just spend more money in that, oh, there's a problem. Oh, your water, the faucet in your house is broken. Let's pass a law. That's what they do in California. Any problem, they go to Sacramento and they pass another law. Doesn't matter. You, Adam and Ross were drinking on the show. Let's have an anti-drinking podcast law. I mean, it never stops. Even liberal friends of mine in the public school system said, you can't believe the laws we have to. I said, well, you keep voting for these people, So, but back to the macro thing, my thing with Trump, okay, what are his policies going forward? What's he stand for? I mean, Joe Biden, bad, he does all the shtick. Now they hate Taylor Swift. I mean, let's grow up. No, serious. We got serious problems. I mean, I know I'm laughing too. I'm not laughing. It's just saying, it's always a culture where the man's guy at Bud Light or whatever. I don't give a shit about this. What are the policies? If we're going to make a change, we're going to go back to this. And I think it's a shit show. Okay. Americans are going to vote for prosperity. I say this to my friends who are not MAGA at all, but they want Trump back. What policies is he delivering? You're not the spokesman, but I'm just trying to hash it out.
No. And I will note, just for folks who don't know me, I did not vote for Trump in 2016. Right. Your previous guest, Joe Walsh, did, which I think is part of the reason he's so mad at himself, because he feels like he got fooled. I did not get fooled, but I will also say, I did vote for Trump in 2020. I held my nose, didn't like him. But when Joe Biden picked Kamala Harris as his running mate, the message to me, because I follow these people closely, is that, all right, if he's picking Kamala Harris, it means he's going to be further to the left and more incompetent than anybody understands. And that part of the analysis actually ended up right. And of course, I didn't know that January 6th was going to happen. At this point, I'm never Trump. I think that what he did on January 6th was absolutely disqualifying. And the metaphor that I like to use, if you'll bear with me for a second, is imagine it's the NBA Finals and, LeBron James is playing in the finals and it's game 7 and LeBron James commits a flagrant foul and turns around and punches a player on the other team in the face. And the refs say, you're out, you're disqualified for the rest of the game. So at that point, the best player in basketball is out in the most important game when his team needs him the most. But it doesn't matter that it's the most important game and his team needs him the most because he's disqualified. That's all that matters. And that's where I am about Trump. So for me, Trump is not a consideration. He's disqualified. That's where I am on him. He does not, I want to word this carefully. There are a few things that Trump actually believes. He actually believes that war is bad and that America should be more isolationist than we have been. He actually believes that free trade is not great. And the economic corollary to that is he actually believes that tariffs are good and useful. What else does he believe? He believes that less regulation is better than more and that less taxes are better than more, which you would expect from a billionaire businessman, but it also happens to be right. I cannot think of another issue where I think he actually has a principle or a deep belief. And populists, because they're populists, go along with whatever they think the people want at that moment. And that usually ends up badly because people tend to be emotional and they get riled up about something. And if you have a president who's willing to go along with it, then you can end up in some very bad spots. America has its moments of populism throughout history. Chris Steyerwalt, who used to be at Fox and is at News Nation now, wrote a really interesting book about American populism called Every Man a King, which I recommend if you put in the show notes too. Every Man a King.
Yeah, we want to have Chris on to talk about it. We've talked about it. We have him in the thick of things. You friend of his?
A bit, yeah.
Okay.
And so, even if you think back to the structure of our American government, the reason that we have a House and Senate and that the Senate has 6-year terms is the idea is that senators will not get caught up in the short-term emotion, the passions of the people at the moment, and they will be more deliberative, and they will not be overrun by these brief tsunamis of emotion. But we live in a country right now where presidents have way too much willingness and ability to get away with governing through executive orders. And if you start letting the president get moved by temporary waves of emotion in the country, that can be an absolute nightmare. And that could be Trump. And I just want to focus on just one quick thing, and then I'll stop. That not enough people are focusing on, and that's tariffs. Donald Trump has said that he's interested in imposing an across-the-board tariff on essentially every imported thing. And folks need to understand that a tariff is nothing but a sales tax paid by Americans, not by the foreigners, right? Trump talks about how we got the Chinese to pay so much in tariffs. The Chinese have paid precisely 0 cents and $0 in tariffs. Americans pay them. And it's basically a national sales tax. And if you're going to put it on every imported thing, you are going to make the cost of so many things go up. You're going to make the cost of living go up. Let's say you put even more of a tariff on imported aluminum and steel. Think about how many people you will put out of business at American companies that use aluminum and steel to make washing machines and cars and beer cans and build houses. And there's no dumber policy economically than tariffs. Everybody knows it. There's some conversation to be had about whether there may be a legitimate use for tariffs regarding China because of bigger geostrategic interests. You can have that separate conversation. But Trump actually saying he wants to come in and put a tariff on everything shows that he does not understand anything about economics. And this is not exaggeration. I do not think I have ever heard of a more dangerous policy in a candidate's platform than that one.
Listen, another way to say a tariff is just a tax at the border, right on us, at our border. It is a national sales tax on Americans. Number one, I am a free trader to my core. I've been anti-tariff my whole life, even when I was a Democrat. So which I'm no longer. And so I'm no longer a Democrat. I'm with you. Number two, why has the Biden administration continued some of Trump's China tariff policies? Because they have. I don't understand why they have done that. Do you?
No, that's easy. No, that one's easy. And that's because Joe Biden is a deep believer in labor unions, industrial labor unions, and he looks at. Have you ever read any Frederick Bastiat, That Which Is Seen and That Which Is Unseen?
No.
It's a wonderful essay. As long as I'm telling you what to put in the show notes, the acronym is TWISA Twins. TWISA TWINS. It's a short essay. It's incredibly brilliant, and everybody should read it. And his point there, Bastiat is a French economist who died in 1850. His point there is, so many people just look at the first effect of things. They don't look at the second effect of things, which is usually more important. And usually if a policy, an economic policy, appears to have a good first effect, that usually means it has a terrible second effect. So Joe Biden looks at this idea, well, if we make imported steel more expensive, then American steel producers won't have to compete against that lower price, and maybe they're a little less efficient. So they'll be able to produce more steel, and we'll have more jobs at the steel mill. And Biden really believes this because he's a moron. And so it goes back to the next thing or the previous thing. And I think the Wall Street Journal just wrote about this. With the Trump tariffs, because Trump put in tariffs on metals. With the Trump tariffs, every metals job, like making steel or aluminum, was associated with a loss of 600 jobs in industries that use metal. For Trump, His attachment to it is because he has this weird aversion to almost anything foreign, including trade. And with Biden, it's because he thinks he's protecting Western Pennsylvania and Eastern Ohio and industrial Indiana, and he's an idiot. But that's why he does it.
Yeah, it's a Rust Belt pandering move, right? No, I agree with that. I mean, I understand that. Yeah, I mean, the tariff thing, I mean, this is the problem, Ross, and we're going to get to the larger question of Trump being disqualified, and I agree with you, he should be based on January 6th, but we'll talk about the Colorado and Maine attempts at disqualifying. But before we do that, the problem that I have, right, as someone who's a moderate and holds many traditionally what you would call conservative or classically liberal positions, is that right-wing Trumpian populism, and let's leave Trumpian out of it, just right-wing populism, believes in an active government. They think a government should regulate people's lives. They think we should clog up the court system with anti-trans laws, and they think that laws that are somehow pro-worker but use the government in a more aggressive, proactive way are good. I disagree with all those things. It doesn't matter what you believe or don't believe in someone's life. Get the government out of our lives. And there is not a cohesive conservative position there, in my opinion. And
so I won't go like
abortion too. Abortion too.
No, I won't go issue by issue. I'll just respond kind of in the macro. First, don't confuse conservatives with lowercase l libertarians like me, or I'm more of an objectivist, Ayn Rand kind of philosophy.
Ayn Rand, yeah.
But I believe in individual liberty. Conservatives believe in individual liberty in certain parts of your life, like business, but not so much in your private life. And liberals are the opposite, right? They want you to have freedom to have an abortion up to the moment the baby is born. But they don't want you to be able to run your business the way you want to run your business. So none of these people actually believe in individual freedom. And that's why I'm not a conservative and not a liberal and not a Democrat and not a Republican. And of course, you started this talking about populists. I mean, by conservative populism doesn't really mean that much, right? If you're a populist, you're not a conservative. And you're not a liberal.
Correct.
You got your finger in the air. Where's the wind blowing?
Correct.
So they're not really conservatives. I mean, sorry, they don't believe in freedom, but the populist version isn't really conservatives. And when it comes to abortion and all that social stuff, well, just to be fair, conservatives never claimed to believe in freedom. At least they're not hypocritical.
Well, I mean, okay, that's a fair point. But when you say that many a mainstream Republican in the last 30 to 40 years, it's gotten worse, have said they believe in limited government, period, but they don't believe in limited government. Not you, not libertarians, but they've run on limited government platform. Get the government out of your life. The government doesn't know anything. The worst thing is the government, what's the worst what's Reagan's thing? If the worst thing you want to hear is the government's here to help. Okay. Well, then the government shouldn't be regulating people's personal lives and people's uteri and get the fuck out of here. I mean, that doesn't, now I'm with you. I believe in that, but I also believe maybe I'm a dirty moderate libertarian. I don't know. But I mean, that the government, if you're going to certainly get it out of my personal life, I do want it out of my economic life. I'm with you on that.
Yeah. Part of the reason this changed is that Roe v. Wade was overturned. And by the way, I was in favor of Roe v. Wade being overturned, even though I'm pro-choice.
Why? Because the states?
Law. If I'm going to allow the Supreme Court to torture the Constitution to get to an outcome that I like, and I'm going to say that's okay because I like the outcome, then where am I going to stand when I'm going to complain about the Supreme Court torturing the Constitution and get to an outcome I don't like? Even Ruth Bader Ginsburg knew that Roe v. Wade was wrong. It was wrong. I wanted it overturned. But just the same way that Republicans had so many years to come up with a replacement for Obamacare and couldn't, the same way here. Maybe they're like the dog that caught the car. Maybe they never thought Roe v. Wade would be overturned, but it seemed pretty clear it was coming once Donald Trump started getting the ability to appoint Supreme Court judges, and they weren't ready. And now they don't know what to do. And now, one state's passing a heartbeat ban, and Florida's got a 6-week ban. And every place this comes up for a vote, even including red states like Kansas, the anti-abortion people get destroyed.
Yeah, because
And
people don't want it. Because people largely, by the way, the states are deciding. Great. I mean, the people don't want it. You know, I think if Joe Biden squeaks out a re-election, it might be because of abortion. It might be because
I mean, that's
independent suburban women. By the way, more cynical Republican operatives, some who've left the party, some have not, will tell you that they only used, who knows what they believe, but the candidates only use the pro-life position to stoke the flames of their evangelical base. They never really thought it would happen, but it was a vote getter. It was a fundraiser, and now they don't have that. Now they've got, right, now it backfired on them. But also what I don't want, but Ross, I'm sure you agree. You now don't want a federal anti-abortion ban codified into law, do you? At the federal government level? I mean, Lindsey Graham's.
Look, for me, it's an easy question. I'm pro-choice, but my whole argument about Roe v. Wade, well, two arguments. I already said one. It was just wrongly decided. But there's no constitutional authority here. There's absolutely no role for the federal government here. And I would note, even to the people who say that abortion is murder, there's no federal role in murder either, except on the rare occasion where a murder is committed in the process of some other federal crime. If you rob a federal bank and commit murder doing it, okay, that turns into a federal murder charge. But if you go carjack somebody down the street here in Denver and you kill somebody, there's no federal role there. And so, no, of course there should not be, as a matter of law and as a matter of our constitutional system, but as a matter of politics, it's also insane. How stupid was it of Lindsey Graham, right, after Roe v. Wade was overturned and Republicans saying for 20 years, or 30 years or 40 or 50 years, we just want to return it to the states. And then Lindsey Graham comes out and says, well, let's do a 15-year federal ban because everybody can really get around that. Like, dude, you just proved to all of these suburban women that you're a liar and you actually want federal involvement. And you mentioned suburban women, but I'm going to mention another group. I mentioned them too, but I'm going to mention another group.
Sure.
Young adults, 18 to 35, 39, they tend not to vote. They don't show up. They're busy. They don't care. They don't think their vote matters. Well, what the Republicans have done by being so aggressive on abortion, although even just having Roe v. Wade overturned without them doing anything else would have done some of this, but they've caused not only all of these young women to turn out to vote, but lots of young men who either share the views of those young women or want to get laid and want to be able to tell those women, hey, I voted the way you wanted me to. And I mean, it's been an incredible vote getter for Democrats, which doesn't mean they shouldn't have done it. It was the right decision at the Supreme Court. I don't mean what state legislators are doing. The Supreme Court was right, but the politics are tricky and the Republicans have not figured it out.
Right. All right. We got to move on now to the disqualification of Donald Trump at the state of Colorado, and then Maine. And so as I said to you in a little pre-green room of the show. So yes, we talked about the conservative judge who testified for January 6th, Michael Ludig, very smart, long-term conservative judge, but also there was a sort of blockbuster legal article last summer. I think it was July of 2023, something like that. Might have been the spring. University of Chicago Federalist legal scholar William Bowd and University of St. Thomas's Michael Stokes Paulson saying that under the 14th Amendment, Section 3, that Trump's actions disqualified him running again. Maine is Secretary of State. She seems pretty weak and liberal, so it doesn't matter. But I'm not a lawyer, but to me, Illinois said today, as we speak, that he is allowed on the ballot. I think the worst thing you could do is decide based on unsettled law. Again, a couple of legal people thinking they're right, Larry Tribe included, who's on the left, that we should disqualify someone that probably half the country wants. What do you think?
Yeah, I think this is terrible in a lot of ways. I will note that the big lawsuit that kind of got this stuff going is from here in Colorado. And I know the attorney who filed it, and one of the plaintiffs is a pretty good friend of mine. And she is way to my right, a former Heritage Foundation scholar, and nobody's idea of a squish or even a moderate. She is really conservative. So I just want to make sure folks understand, as you just pointed out when you're talking about that original article, that some of the push for this is coming, much of the push from this is coming from the right. It's just the anti-Trump right. I think they are wrong on the law. I'm only a little bit surprised that they won in Colorado, because we have a terrible Supreme Court in Colorado. It is all appointed by Democrats. And whenever they have a ruling that is kind of political, you can almost always predict where they are going to go. They are as bad a Supreme Court as you're going to find in this country here in Colorado. But so, all right, I'll come back to the law in a second. On the politics, this is the stuff of revolution. You start telling people, I mean, how about this? Joe Biden several months ago tried to do a little deal, not too much risk for the United States in trying, with the government of Venezuela, where the government of Venezuela said, we'd like some relief from oil selling sanctions. And the Biden administration said, okay, we'll give you some relief for oil selling sanctions. We'll let you sell a little more oil, but you have to allow an opposition candidate to run in the election. And they said, fine. And I said on my radio show, you might as well try this, even though the Venezuelans will probably break their word. And we learned yesterday that they broke their word. And the Supreme Court in Venezuela said that the opposition guy can't run. So that's Venezuela. Right. So my friends here in Colorado are trying to turn us into Venezuela. And to say a court is going to say that this guy can't run, a guy who would have a very good chance of winning if he were allowed to run and the election were fair. And this, I'm not being hyperbolic when I say this is the stuff of revolution. And if people on the left say, oh, look at January 6th, or Trump supporters are prone to violence or something, and I'm not saying this would be good. I'm not calling for it. But when it comes to political violence, if Trump loses because people, in a way where people believe that he lost because he was kept off a ballot, you are going to see political violence like we have not seen in quite some time in this country.
Yeah. And my thing is this too. And, a lot of people who cheered on Jack Smith, not on the documents case, but on the January 6th case, one thing you have to credit Jack Smith with is he did not indict Trump on inciting an insurrection. He's been very clear about that. People have never read anything go, well, what about the Jack Smith? I said, that is not what Jack Smith did, because proving insurrection in a court of law is a very, very high bar in criminal law. All right. Almost impossible. So I guess what I say, I'm not an attorney, but I try to think like one and try to think about the Constitution. How can you have this post-Civil War amendment, by the way, which was reserved for all these Confederate officers who had participated in the Civil War, and they didn't want them to, they were trying to find a way to punish them in some sort of way, right? Mm-hmm. And again, that was 1868, 1870. I mean, how can you have this one particular piece of the 14th Amendment, which is a very important part of our laws now, but go, kind of contradict itself with what the special prosecutor is essentially looking at in the horrific events of January 6th, which you and I know are unforgivable.
Right. Okay. So just to clarify, it's not that the 14th Amendment is contradictory against something. It's that the people who are trying to get Trump barred based on the 14th Amendment, that's contradictory with the fact that the guy who was prosecuting Trump for all of this stuff declined to prosecute him for either inciting insurrection or engaging in insurrection. Yes. So a couple of things I want to say about this, and these are going to be questions for the Supreme Court.
Okay.
Is it okay for a single state judge or a multi-member state court to decide whether somebody engaged in insurrection under the federal Constitution? Does a state court get to decide that? In Colorado, at first it was a single judge. Then it was a 4-3 vote. I don't know how many people know the vote was 4-3 of the state Supreme Court. And then in Maine, there was no judge. There was just, you mentioned, the very, very partisan Secretary of State. So are these people even allowed to determine whether somebody engaged in insurrection? So that's one question. The other question, and this is a hard one, is whether Section 3 of the 14th Amendment applies to the President of the United States.
Right.
It talks about various people. It talks about members of Congress. It talks about presidential electors, like members of the Electoral College. And it talks about officers of the United States.
Right.
So if you were any of those and have taken an oath of office to the United States previously, and then you broke your office by engaging in insurrection, then you're not eligible. It is, I know this is going to sound silly to a lot of people. It is not a matter of settled law whether the president is an officer of the United States. And to the extent that there have been cases that touch on this, it appears that the president is not an officer of the United States. And I would also note that the original version of that section of the 14th Amendment named the president as one of the people it would apply to. And in the editing process and negotiating, and before they voted on it and before it became part of the Constitution, they took that out. So a lot of people argue that an officer of the United States are all the people who work for the federal branch who are appointed by the president, but the president, being an elected position, is not an officer. The Supreme Court is going to have to decide this. The bottom line and the most important thing of all of this is, in all but the most extreme situations, these decisions have to be left to voters.
Yes, and I agree with that, but I want to touch on one thing, and then we're going to finish our finishing drink here before we go. But to your point, yes, it's very interesting. So the 14th Amendment, equal protection and other rights, Section 3, disqualification from holding office. This is interesting language, right? To your point about excluding the president. No person shall be a senator or representative in Congress, and here's the sort of sweet spot, or elector of president and vice president, or hold any office, civil or military, under the United States or under any state, who have previously taken an oath as a member of Congress or an officer of the United States. It literally says an elector of president or vice president, but doesn't say president, which is very interesting. But at the end of it, this is where I go, and I'd love to sit down with some of these legal scholars, but Congress may, by a vote of 2/3 of each house, remove such disability. So then let's argue that this applies to the president, right? Well, then can't Congress then pass a law that's the inverse of that? In other words, can't Congress say, well, if Congress can, by a vote of two-thirds of each house, removes this sort of restriction, can't then the Senate and the House put the restriction back? In other words, put the right for him to run back in? Meaning, if you're leaving it to Congress, then it isn't settled law.
None of this is settled, and that 2/3 thing is interesting, right? It basically,
I'm just bringing it up to say, if you follow it logically, right? Couldn't Congress then pass a law saying, well, actually, this did apply to the president, but we actually think this person, like Donald Trump, is not guilty of an insurrection, should be allowed to run?
Right, and so I don't know that that's exactly what passing a law in the sense that most people would think about it, but it would be. I guess it would be passing a bill or a law that would apply to this one guy in this one situation. Yeah. And it would basically be kind of the opposite of conviction for, let's say, impeachment, right? It would be this person committed insurrection, and by 2/3 vote, we're going to say, but he can still run. We're going to remove the penalty. The other part, though, if you go to Section 5 of the 14th Amendment, talks about what has to happen in order for this thing to be really workable going forward. And they say Congress essentially has to pass a law to implement this thing, and Congress hasn't. And so I think that my friends who are challenging Donald Trump, I think they're wrong on the law, but I also think that they are creating an incredibly dangerous thing. And I suspect that one or two of them, now seeing what's happened in Maine, what's happening in some other places, where these places are now saying, you know what, yeah, let's keep Trump off the ballot. And now you've got some conservatives in red states, but of course, red states have Democratic candidates for various stuff. Imagine you're in a red state with a big blue city. There's quite a few of those, right? Some of these people are saying, well, all right, we think that what happened in the summer of love after the George Floyd riots and the burning of these cities and all these riots, we think that was insurrection. And so we're going to find a Democratic candidate who took part in that. And we're going to say that person was engaged in insurrection, and we're going to keep them off our ballot here. And I think some of the folks who were bringing this are realizing, as the rest of us did from day one, that they're creating the slipperiest of slopes that leads to revolution.
Right. No, it's a fair point. I'm curious, in the 4-3 vote in Colorado. So you're saying that 3 liberal or Democratic justices dissented. Is that correct?
Yes.
I have not read those dissents. What's the takeaway from those dissents, given that they're not on the right, they're on the left?
Okay. So I don't want to get too far out over my skis here.
No,
but
I mean, just give me the snapshot, because I didn't know that.
Yeah. Okay. The snapshot is the people who voted yes, keep them off the ballot. The judges who voted yes, keep them off the ballot, said the lower court judge was right that Donald Trump engaged in insurrection, and therefore The dissent said this procedure is wrong. They did not opine on whether he engaged in insurrection.
Right.
They said he did not get proper due process in the trial, for example. He didn't get to call witnesses and that kind of thing. So, and I think it's kind of clever of them, right? They are liberals in a liberal state, and they probably hate Trump at least a little bit, but they basically said this process was flawed, which I actually think is the most important argument.
Right. Which is that like almost like you don't really have standing for this? Is it a version of that or not quite?
Not quite, but it's, you know, if we're going to take away this incredibly important right, not so much the right of Trump to be on the ballot, the right of voters to vote for who they want to vote for,
right,
then you better go through, you know, making sure the process is right, making sure the person gets due process. To me, if I were to think of a different analogy, and I am president of the Bad Analogy Club, but it would be more like a trial where witness testimony is excluded because, or the trial gets thrown out because the arrested person didn't get his Miranda rights, and it's just a fundamental violation of fairness as we have defined it.
It's procedure. It's procedure essentially. When they teach that, right?
It is. Yeah.
Right. You have to be right. My whole thing is, and Ross, this is the final thing in it before we do our celebratory goodbye drink, is it does test the limits of federalism, because I'm with you. Look, there's 50 states, there's 50 election authorities, because the elections are not federally run. However, you have to say, when you're dealing with a national election for president, you're dealing with a national election for president. Okay. Then you have to say that this has to be resolved at the federal level, because you can't leave it to the states. So that's also the rub here.
I think so. Last quick thing on this. I think that the Supreme Court's going to overturn Colorado.
Yeah,
I hope that it's unanimous, because otherwise I think it's going to tear the court apart even more if it's not unanimous, or at least 8-1. Sotomayor tends to get a lot of things wrong. But I think that John Roberts is going to do everything he can to make this a unanimous decision. And that means they're going to have to do it in a way where they do not opine on whether Trump engaged in insurrection at all. They have to only opine about the procedure and about whether it's okay for the states to do this kind of thing. And here's the key. They have to do it in a way that not only overturns Colorado, but blocks any other state from taking the same road or relying on Colorado. They do not want to have to hear a case like this again, ever. And so they're going to have to do something that is as narrow as possible, but broad enough to make sure that everybody understands, no, you cannot do this, but without saying what Trump did was fill in the blank.
Well, I think that's brilliant, because the whole thing has been, how do we prevent another scoundrel from doing this again? And that court will not answer that. The court will answer in the problematic road that and procedural deficiencies of this. I think that's right. So it doesn't have to answer that, right? Because no two cases, hopefully we might have someone far worse, God forbid, and that may be a different question. That person might need to be disqualified, and this won't touch that. Ross, before we go, we do our final drink, the election. All right, I know you're not voting for Joe Biden. I get it. So who are you voting for?
I usually vote Libertarian in presidential elections, and I probably will again, depending on who the Libertarian Party candidate is. I'm not a member of the Libertarian Party, but you know, these guys have to earn my vote, and Biden hasn't, and Trump hasn't. So that's, you know, I think the main thing that would keep me from voting Libertarian is if the Libertarian Party candidate ends up being Robert F. Kennedy Jr. I got no use for him. We can talk about that another day. So we'll see. You know, it's easy for me. I feel very differently from your last guest, Joe Walsh. Joe Walsh thinks that Trump represents a much bigger, clear and present danger to the United States than Joe Biden does. I do not agree with that analysis. I think they represent fairly equal, clear and present dangers. In fact, maybe Biden represents a bigger danger, but Trump is disqualified. So I'm not voting for him. I'd probably vote Libertarian.
Fair enough. It wasn't a loaded question. I just know. See, I'm with Joe. I mean, I'm a never Trumper to me. Look, I may go third party, but I just feel like I'm going to throw away my vote. I can't vote for Trump. I mean, look, I think anybody who believes that Trump is disqualified just simply shouldn't vote for him. I mean, when I say shouldn't, I'm not somebody's parent or headmistress or something, but I just, you can't square those things. And to your point, anybody that's proposing that level of tariff enactment, that level of which is out of bounds to me, as some kind of crazy national sales tax, is disqualifying ideologically to me.
Yeah.
So I agree with you on that.
Really clear. I want to make one thing really clear. I said earlier, I gave you my basketball analogy about Donald Trump being disqualified.
Yeah.
I believe he is ethically disqualified. I do not believe he is legally disqualified.
Correct.
I want to make that clear.
Oh, I agree with you. I disagree with that. I hope the court overturns this. There's no evidence of it. And by the way, Eugene Debs ran from prison, so he probably will get convicted on one of these cases, I would think, before the election. There's 91 charges. I don't know that polls show independents recoil at that. Does that mean does that mean that we have low turnout? People stay home and Trump wins enough of a motivated base and there aren't enough people who are in the anti-Trump camp coming? Let's say kids, for all their ballyhoo and bluster, stay home.
Yeah.
Right. And independents just go, I can't hold my nose this time. I did 2020 to get rid of him, but things have gotten worse. And that leaves a motivated base plus a core of Democrats. I mean, look, Trump is doing better with working class communities of all color.
Yeah.
He's doing better with Latinos and Black. If he takes like 18 or 20% or something like that, I was talking to a numbers guy about this, of the Black male vote, the Democrats have a real problem. I mean, people don't understand this. They don't understand numbers. They think Trump's not winning the largest. Trump's not winning the Black. But if he decreases the Biden share of the Black vote, he's in a much better position.
I'd be pretty surprised if he gets 20%. I can imagine
black males of the black
not males, right.
Black male, not black women. No.
Not all, right, not black women. And I could see something drifting in that direction. And I also think he'll get double that percentage of Hispanic males. And so for sure. And a lot of these young people, this kind of ties back into some of the stuff we were talking about before. Young people are turned off against Biden because of Israel. And we didn't mention this before, but it's worth mentioning. When Joe Biden proposed to cancel all student loans, what I said on my radio show is the Supreme Court's going to stop him, and he's going to leave all these young people disappointed because they're going to think he promised them something and he didn't deliver. That's happened. So this could be a very low turnout election. And the other thing to keep in mind is Cornel West is going to be there. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. remains to be seen how many states' ballots he'll be on. It is not impossible that we'll see an election where you can credibly point to the presence of third-party candidates having decided the election, kind of like going back to Ralph Nader in Florida in the year 2000.
Yeah, in a squeaker election, that's for sure. Well, one thing is for certain. I love having you on the show. I toast to you because you love America, and I do too. And you believe in the American experiment. You want to endure, and you're a patriot. And to me, that's what this show's about, is discoursing with people, and not that I don't think we disagree a lot, but I think we have maybe a different end game, but I think we have the same value system. And even if we didn't, I'd still have booze with you. This artfully aged hey, listen, thanks for hanging with Dirty Moderate After Dark. Ross Kaminsky of KOA in Colorado. If you don't listen to his radio show, you should. And if you're in Colorado and you are now becoming a brainwashed blue voter, please tune in. Get some fucking common sense. At least be a dirty moderate. Get off your high horse. And
that's right. I just did a moment of shameless self-promotion. Even if you're not here, you can get the Ross Kaminsky Show podcast everywhere. Apple, Spotify, Spreaker, wherever you get podcasts. And the nice thing about my podcast, and it's a 3-hour radio show, but over the air, a lot of that is ads. And there's almost no ads in podcast. So the podcast is much shorter. And one other thing in terms of shameless self-promotion, I have probably the best guests of any local radio host in the country. And we put those on the podcast as standalone podcasts. So yesterday I had Kim Strassel and I had Andy McCarthy. And on Thursday, I'm going to have former NATO Supreme Allied Commander Admiral James Stavridis, and those all go up as standalones on the podcast feed, so you can just hear that without having to listen to the whole show.
All right. So given that even though you are a superstar in your local bookings, I am not local and you've had amazing people. So I want to be a non-local booking. How's that?
Let's do it. I'm happy
Let's
to.
do it. Have me on. We'll have, I'd love to do it. And really, I'd love to be on the show and talk about it because I think hashing all this stuff out, it actually helps my thinking, and to the places we diverge, hey, we're all the better for it, you know? So let's post. L'chaim, where do you, L'chaim, by the way, where can people find you on Twitter too? Tell them that.
At Rosputin, Rossputin. And no, it's not named for Vladimir. I've been Rosputin online since the 1990s. It's a reference to Russian history.
Yes. Yes. People, if you wake up, learn some history, study the Romanovs, study Rasputin, get a life, study the czars, stop history did not begin with you. Yeah. And you know, that's the other problem now. Everyone thinks history started today or 10 years ago, and there's nothing that ever happened, but especially on Israel and Palestine. But we've covered it. Listen, folks, thank you for, again, Dirty Moderate After Dark with Ross Kaminsky. Ross, don't leave us, but I'll say cheers.
L'chaim.
Yeah, hi.